Hello, everyone, and welcome to ACS Webinars, connecting you with the best and brightest minds in chemistry, live from Washington, D.C. I'm Michael David, and I will be your host for today's webinar, which is being co-produced with the Science History Institute. Our moderator today is Keith D. Wing, who received his BA from UCLA and PhD from UC Riverside Davis. After postdoctoral research at UC Berkeley, he spent 29 years as a senior research associate and team leader at Rome and Haas and DuPont Ag and Central Research and Development, working on agrochemical discovery, renewable chemicals, and microbial detection. He then consulted independently in those same areas from 2012 to 2023. In addition, he has served on the Science History Institute's Joseph Priestley Society for 12 years. And before I turn it over to Keith, I would like to introduce you to Grace Sharples-Cook, Director of the Office of the President at the Science History Institute, who would like to make a brief announcement.
Thank you, Mike. The Science History Institute is a museum and library in Philadelphia with a digital magazine as well, so you can connect with us online. We collect, preserve, interpret, and share the stories behind the science. We are very grateful for the collaboration between ACS and our Joseph Priestley Society in producing this webinar. The Joseph Priestley Society promotes a deeper understanding of science, technology, and industry with an emphasis on innovation and entrepreneurship. Speakers are leaders from a wide variety of large and small chemical or life science companies and the financial consulting and academic communities. Now, let me hand things over to today's moderator, Dr. Keith Wing. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you for your introduction, Grace and Michael. Before we get started, I just wanted to say, isn't science fun? Here we have a topic, chemistry of romance, flavor, and drink, where as time goes on, we get better definitions of the chemistry and the mechanisms involved. And yet in spite of that, romance remains, mystery remains, and there's a lot to be discovered, and it brings moods and fun to the whole endeavor. And today we have three excellent guides to begin this journey. Jim St.John earned his chemical engineering degree at Lehigh. He's now retired. He previously was with General Foods and Mobile Chemical. Jim is an expert in chocolate formulation and processing. He's a chocolate industry veteran with 35 years of experience, including Hershey's. At Hershey's, he became a leader in Hershey's milk chocolate processes, and finally became Hershey's senior fellow and master chocolate maker. Jim holds numerous patents and patent applications and helped create a line of, quote, better for you chocolates. Another expert that we have on the panel is Kim Bleimann. Kim has been engaged in flavor and fragrance industry since 1973 when he joined Berger Incorporated. He became the president of Berger in 1981, and that company now has over 250 employees of 20 different nationalities. Berger has facilities in the U.S., Peru, Switzerland, Spain, and Bulgaria. It is now in its 76th year and is a very active and vital supplier of essential oils and aromatic chemicals. Kim is a member of the Flavor Extracts Manufacturers Association, the International Federation of Essential Oils and Aroma Trades. He's been a director for 12 years, the European Federation of Essential Oils, and in 2011 became the chair of the International Fragrance Association of North America. He's a very active speaker at international trade conferences. And finally, we have our master flavorist, Sam Tharpe, who has 35 years of experience and is now with the Symrise Company. He is constantly trying to make the world a better tasting place, and he's worked in beverages, confections, pet food, and pharmaceuticals, working with food companies at the very, very forefront of food industry trends. Sam earned his bachelor's at Bridgewater College, and he trained as a flavorist at Narden International in Owings Mills, Maryland. He is a certified member of the Society of Flavor Chemists. In 1999, he was certified. And in addition, he is on the board of the Science History Institute. And with that, I'd like to get our program started and turn it over to Sam to get us going.
Thank you, Keith. It's really a big pleasure to be here and welcome everyone. As Keith mentioned, I am a member of the Society of Flavor Chemists, and The Society of Flavor Chemists is working to preserve the history of the flavor industry with partnering with the Science History Institute. We have our archives here. We're also collecting oral histories, and we're very excited about this project. So today we're going to go on a journey of learning the story behind the science of roses, chocolate, and wine. It's going to be a very exciting journey, and I'm very assured that I have got great support here with my colleagues who will also be presenting today. So my job here is to set the stage for your learning ability, to talk about, introduce vocabulary of the flavor world, to introduce you to the flavor world, and also to kind of get back in touch with yourself, your human senses, and understand the physiology of our senses. So our human senses are very important. It's something that we take for granted. That is, until nature has a different idea. And we can all say that the pandemic of 2020 is all now part of our collective history. And some of us may have lost our sense of taste and smell. I was a little late in the game, having lost my sense of taste and smell just last year for 2 weeks. Naturally, you say, is it coming back? And naturally, I thought, oh, this is a liability. This could be a problem. So let's continue to talk about the senses. Environment plays such a big role in how we interpret. Interpretation is all what this is all about, because it really is our own life experiences. But if we take our wine, roses, and chocolate under the iconic love sculpture here in Philadelphia, it brings on a whole different level of atmosphere that's just helps to punctuate that special feeling. So let's talk about smell, taste, touch, sight, hearing. These are things that, again, we take for granted. And this is how we interpret our world, through smell. Going into a chocolate store or a bakery, to me, is one of the happiest places I can go. No one has any right to be unhappy in a chocolate store. Taste. This is where the definition of flavor and taste gets a little cloudy, because we all ask, how does it taste? We don't say, oh, it's sweet, it's sour, it's salty, it's bitter. Oh, I think it has a little umami. We say it always tastes good. But taste, we know, is done with our tongue. Touch, texture, temperature, mouthfeel. Think about that piece of chocolate melting in your mouth, or think about that wine swirling in your mouth, feeling the silkiness of both, and how important that is. Sight, the color of the wine, the geometry of the chocolate, how it's displayed, what's on top of that chocolate. Hearing, just hearing the pouring of a wine in a glass brings us right to it, that we want to go further, we want to explore. Or the snap of chocolate, how we're anticipating what we're getting ready to experience. So we've talked about our taste. Now let's talk about the smell, our world, the perfume of our world. Food is really the perfume of our world. As we experience the world around us, there are two methods in which those molecules enter our nasal chamber to be analyzed by our receptor. That's orthonasal and retronasal. Ortho, meaning from the front, through the nostrils. And, it's remarkable. We have been born with our own gas chromatograph mass spectrometries. We can analyze, I Googled this, over 1 trillion molecules. Now, the point is, can we really describe those molecules? We can say in general terms, but we'll talk more about that. So then we have retronasal, and retronasal is where it happens in the mouth the throat, the molecules go up into your nasal chamber as you're eating your food. And again, it's the perfume of the food that we're experiencing the flavor. So I love this saying, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." This was by a philosopher, German philosopher. And think about this: the limits of my language are the limits of my world. The more we learn language, the more we learn descriptor, the wider our world will get, the more experiences we have. And it really, our flavor language starts with our own experiences. It's our life experiences. It's our grandmothers making apple pie, sitting around the table as a family and enjoying the specialties of family members, and then talking about them and celebrating them. That's where our language really begins. And language, as color has many shades and many languages, and culture and language, different shades are interpreted different ways. So is the language of the perfume of our food. And, this is the challenge. How do we get better at this? So flavor perception, it's all about practice, practice, practice. So often we say to a friend, "How does it taste?" "Well, it tastes good." Well, if you remember back, I don't think tastes good is part of the sweet, sour, salty, umami lineup. So how can we get better at this to describe and really sort of expand our world with our vocabulary? And it really is about honing in on what your own experiences are, finding those reference points, going into your wine store and reading those sometimes, I think, ridiculous descriptions of wine, but really sort of trying to understand, well, what is cassis? What is black currant? What is cinnamon? What is mineral? I don't quite understand this, but then finding your own references, pulling from your own life experiences. I use oak as an example. I happen to like bourbon. To me, bourbon is the quintessential of what oak is. Wonderful. Tannic, brewed tea. So let's understand what flavor is. I'm keep on talking about the perfume or food, and it really is. It's all about those molecules that are floating around that we just happen to absorb through retronasal and orthonasal olfaction. And in the flavor world, we have, as a flavor chemist, 10,000 different flavoring substances have been identified. That is a big palette to work from as an artist of perfume for food. So I have access to 2,500 in my palette, and that includes essential oils, think rose oil, or botanical extracts, think vanilla extract, think distilled extracts as well. That could be clove bud extract. So a big palette in which I can put the pieces of nature's puzzle back together to create this wonderful aroma that we're so familiar with in our food products. Now, the common link for all of this is vanilla. Vanilla is a great modifier. It has synergy effects with rose, in wine, and in chocolate. And one of the single molecules in vanilla is called vanillin. And if you wonder what vanillin smells like, buy a piece of white chocolate and smell it and eat it, because that's almost pure vanillin with a little maybe cocoa butter thrown in there. But it's a very, very distinct, clean vanilla flavor. When did it all begin? So in 1874, Dr. William Harmon applied for a patent. He was one of the founding fathers of my company that I work for now, Simrise Inc. And with his partner, Dr. Reimer, they developed a commercial process to make vanillin. And the research began using the sap of the large tree, a coniferous evergreen or deciduous conifer. And they noticed that the sap had this sweet vanilla component to it. So this really changed the industry. The CEO of Symrise, we celebrated this milestone last year, 150 years. And the CEO of Symrise, Dr. Jean-Yves Perreault, said this was the big bang of the industry, the beginning of the global flavor and fragrance movement. This one molecule. There was some convincing, though, that Dr. Hyman and Dr. Reimer had to do. They had to prove that vanillin was the same molecule as found in vanilla beans, and that the product was a pure state. So they actually went through and figured out how to determine the amount of vanillin content in vanilla beans, which varies from year to year. And they showed, hey, you're dependent on a natural product. We can offer you the same profile, and it's always going to be available. Now, they targeted the chocolate industry and also other food industries as well, but more or less chocolate, because up to this time, the aroma and taste of vanilla was for the elite. So here we see vanilla beans and the crystallization forming. The interesting thing about vanillin is it also has antimicrobial effect. So when they're aging out in the open air, they have a natural ability to prevent microbial growth, which is pretty amazing. Also, vanillin, when something is oaked, think bourbon, think wine. There's natural vanillin actually in that oak wood that goes into the wine and mellows things out. It provides that sort of vanilla taste. Here's the molecule of vanillin. It's a phenolic aldehyde. A lot of organic functional groups on here as well. It's a complex molecule, but a stable molecule. Sources of vanillin are just varied, and they've changed over the years. So much has focused on the biosynthesis from rice bran and biosynthesis in general. So you have vanillin X ferulic acid. Just within 25 years, this has happened. That vanillin X clove, vanillin X guaiacol, vanillin X lignin from wood pulp, and vanillin through biosynthesis. Here's a link to ACS publication about biosynthesis of vanillin. So 1874 to 2026, we've come a long way. Now here is a schematic to show you how everything is interacted, but flavor is so complicated and so sophisticated because you have roasting, you have extraction, you have all these molecules popping up, rose oxide for that rose aroma. You have the vanillin. And just doing a quick search of products, here's on the upper right-hand side is a song for rose. It is chocolate scented with rose, but if you open up, they also have an original composition. So they're mixing music with that as well, which I absolutely love. Rose vanilla, you see how that works together? What does vanilla do to rose? It sweetens it. So let's continue this journey of discovery, and I'll hand you to our next speaker. Jim?
Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about chocolate today, and I have to say I'm a little excited about this because normally my audiences are either marketers or procurement people or buyers, and now I get to talk to an audience of scientific people. So I'm really going to have a good time explaining the science behind chocolate. And when you think about chocolate, there are many, many, many different compounds. If you Google it today, you'd see there are probably about 800 compounds that contribute to the flavor of chocolate. And the chocolate maker has a lot of levers to pull in order to modify this flavor and bring you something that tastes terrific. It's a combination of what type of bean it is, where the bean is from, how it's fermented, how it's dried, how it's roasted. And then as the chocolatier builds the chocolate for you to taste, how does he blend beans? How does he grind it down to be a fine particle size? And how does he conch it? And we'll get into each of these and how it affects the flavor. But first, let's talk about chocolate's grown about 20 degrees north and south of the equator across the world. Its original ancestral home was Latin America. And as you can see on this map, there are many, many countries that produce chocolate or produce cacao, with Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Indonesia being the leaders. Although Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana probably make up about 2/3 of the crop in the world. And so most major companies must lean on this area in order to produce a product. But not only region, you also have type, and there are probably about a dozen different types of beans. And when I talk about types of beans, if you think about coffee, you think about Arabica or Robusta, and you think Arabica good, or Robusta just filler, maybe not that good. In the world of chocolate, it's not really like that. The three leading are all good, and some are very good. But Forastero is probably up to 80% of the crop, maybe even a little bit more. And that's where you have a good, strong chocolate flavor. And a chocolatier is going to lean on that to deliver strong chocolate. And right now in the marketplace, that trades for maybe $4,000 a metric ton. But then there's Trinitario and Criollo. And these are these very delicate flavored beans that might trade as much as 3 times. They might be at $10,000 or $12,000 a metric ton right now. And these are the ones that bring in these very subtle flavors. And so the chocolatier has to pick from where am I getting these and what type am I getting? And then in the country, it's a rather manual process. So in the top left-hand corner, this is someone in Ghana who was harvesting fresh pods. And you get about 2 harvests a year off of a tree. And the farmer must know when that pod is ready. And then takes the pod off the tree, cuts it open. And the top right, that was a village in Peru raising some Criollo beans. And this woman is, with a machete, cutting open the pod. And then you can see that open pod there, and you can see the beans in that pod. And those beans are collected. And then they're put on a mat, or they're put on I don't know if these are banana leaves or palm leaves to keep them off the ground. There's some nasty things on the ground in order to ferment. And the fermentation takes about 5 or 7 days. And I'll get into fermentation in the next slide. But this is the first real critical process in chocolate. And then once the fermentation is done, then a product must be dried. And here's on the bottom left, here's someone who has the mats beamed off the ground to get air circulating around them and to get them dry. And it needs to be dried to below 7% really to stabilize the bean and prevent it from microbes growing on it and ruining the bean. And then in fermentation, and it's a little misnomer here. So cocoa beans are fermented. And there is about maybe 1 to 2% sugars in the beans. So there's not very much. And then the beans are also fermented with the pulp that comes out of the pod as well, which is maybe 10 to 15% sugar. And you have these reactions going on, and you're developing some polyphenols, or you're developing alcohol, and the alcohol breaks down. You're also developing some Maillard precursors. But not all of that is classic fermentation. This is where there are enzyme reactions going on. And the enzymes will break down compounds down into peptides and amino acids that are ready to react with other carbohydrates that have been broken down through enzyme reaction. And you end up developing some reducing sugars. And those we will use later in the process. Now, also during fermentation, you're going to break polyphenols down. So people have probably heard that polyphenols or flavonols are good for you. And but the more you ferment a bean, which is good for flavor, the more breakdown of polyphenols you have. So, you know, what is the chocolate maker looking for? Does he want his product to be healthy for you, or does he want his product to taste good? And usually the chocolatier is going to lean on the latter. He wants it to taste good. And then we look at, okay, we've got the beans. They've been dried, and hopefully they've been dried below 7%. Now, sometimes some farmers are apt to accelerate drying, and they might build little fires underneath those mats that you saw in that picture, and then the beans might develop a smoky flavor. And honestly, for me, smoky flavor, that's good in Scotch. It's not so good in chocolate. So usually those beans trade at a discount from that smoky flavor. But anyway, so the chocolate companies receive these dry beans, and they're going to roast the beans. And we'll get into roasting, but roasting is all about taking those precursors and pushing reactions to get different flavors at the end. And then once the bean is roasted, you break the bean, you get rid of the shell, and then you end up with these little pieces of beans that you can see in this picture that are nibs. And you're going to grind those nibs, and that's going to become unsweetened chocolate, or sometimes called cocoa mass. And think about peanuts. You take peanuts, you grind them, you get peanut butter. You take cocoa nibs, you grind them, you get unsweetened chocolate. And then I saw an early question someone put in, how do you make cocoa powder? Well, you take this unsweetened chocolate and you physically press it like you would press olive oil, or olives for olive oil. You press unsweetened chocolate and you get cocoa butter and cocoa powder. And then the chocolatier has to take that, mix it with other ingredients we'll talk about, reduce the particle size so it's nice and smooth in the mouth, and then conch it. And in conching, you might, again, force more Maillard reactions in order to develop flavors. And then finally, you temper chocolate to get it in the right crystalline state and mold it. So in roasting, this is another lever that the chocolatier has and typically doesn't talk about. How are you going to roast your product or your beans? And you could go for a low roast. A lot of the finer beans, the Criollo and Trinitero, you might do a lower roast. You want to protect those fruity and floral flavors. Whereas if you have something that we want to drive a good, strong chocolate flavor, you might take an Ivorian bean, Forastero bean, and drive a hard roast, a high roast, and drive those chocolate flavors. And so it's up to the chocolate maker to pick with each bean, how am I going to roast this? And then through that roasting, you can see you're going to develop different compounds, which are going to deliver different flavors. But then also, you're going to end up with some other products. So in the cocoa beans, so two of them are the methylxanthanes, and a lot of people think that chocolate has a lot of caffeine in it. That's not really true. Chocolate has a compound similar to it, theobromine, which doesn't really have the stimulating effect like caffeine has. But these two compounds are very bitter. So when you think about when you put chocolate in your mouth, you've got that bitterness on your tongues. And then you have these polyphenols or flavonols like epicatechin, catechin, and then in wine you hear a lot about resveratrol. It's in chocolate as well. The more fermented the bean is, the less you're going to have these. But they deliver, again, a little bit of a bitterness to the chocolate, which in the right amount we all love. So anyway, so then here we have a trivia question. We had the beans. You saw them. If you can see me holding a cacao pod. So how many beans do you think is needed to make a typical chocolate bar?
And as you can see, just with the possible choices, 5, 10, 25, 50, or 100. And it looks like people are skewing towards the larger amount of beans. So 39% said 50 and 39% said 100. So that'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. I'm always curious what people think about this one. And it's really 25 would make a milk chocolate bar. And so a cocoa pod has usually between 40 and 60 beans. So let's say 50. So you get about 2 chocolate bars out of a pod. And you start doing the math, and these major chocolate companies, every day they need the equivalent of millions of pods to make their chocolate. So there are a lot of farmers in West Africa producing every day for this. Okay, so in a sense, what we've done up to now, we've taken a bean, we've roasted it, so we have our base chocolate flavor. And we might have pressed it, and we've gotten cocoa powder and cocoa butter. Cocoa powder is actually the byproduct of milk and dark chocolate making, because we're going to use the unsweetened chocolate and cocoa butter to make a milk or a dark chocolate. So here are two typical formulations, and that's a standard milk. It's a little high in cacao for a milk, and then next to it is a 60% dark. So that 40% or so sugar is gonna be a real player in this bar. And then let me digress here. In milk chocolate making, you have dark chocolate where you've developed flavors with the bean and fermentation and roasting. And milk chocolate, you can go a little further, and you can have a couple things going on. And you can heat the milk chocolate up in that conching process that I talked about, and that's going to drive Maillard reactions. And you're going to get things like diacetyl and other things like that, and those classic caramel flavors. You can also do hydrolysis, and that might lean more cheesy, but then hydrolysis could also end up with problems. And for example, with cocoa butter, you could be cleaving off fatty acids from the glycerol backbone, and you can have these medium and longer chain fatty acids. They're going to give a sour and soapy flavor. So a lot of chocolate makers will deodorize their cocoa butter before using it to have a cleaner, crisper flavor in their chocolate. And then sugar. I can't talk about chocolate without talking about sugar. As you saw in those formulations, sugar could make up 40%, 50%, 55% of a chocolate. And there's sucrose and there's lactose. If you're using milk chocolate, you have lactose. And lactose is about 1/5 as sweet as sucrose. So sucrose is really doing the work here. And sucrose will do a few things. One, for a chocolate maker, it takes up space. I get asked, to make how would you make a sugar-free chocolate? Would you take the sugar out and just put a high-potency sweetener in? No, because now I've lost 50% of my volume. I have to put something else in with it. But sugar does a few things, and most importantly, it modifies the flavor of chocolate. Where we talked about these bitter compounds like polyphenols and theobromine, and sugar does a nice job in modulating that bitterness and making it nicer in the mouth and allowing those flavors those good flavors to evaporate into your nasal cavity. And also, it's not only how much sugar you're using, but the particle size of sugar is very important. So if you grind sugar very fine, when you first put it in your mouth, it has a lot of surface area and it will dissolve very quickly, giving you a spike of sweetness. And then you are left with the bitterness of cacao. Whereas if you had larger particles, it has a slower dissolving rate in your mouth, and it works better with the cacao. However, larger particles are not nice in your mouth. It feels gritty. So it's always this balance of how fine the sugar should be for particle size and how does it modify the chocolate. And you can see here too, the really wonderful thing about sugar, it dissolves without any cooling or heating sensation in your mouth. So those things don't battle what's going on in your mouth. And then cocoa butter. You saw you had cocoa butter. In the United States is unusual. In the US, the only fats you're allowed to use in something that you would call a milk or a dark chocolate are either the fat from a cocoa bean, cocoa butter, or fat from milk fat. In other countries, you're allowed to use palm and shea and other things. So when people say, "Oh, the Europeans make better chocolate than Americans," I'm always a little surprised to hear that. But anyway, what does cocoa butter do? Well, that fat, which cocoa butter melts at about 93 degrees Fahrenheit, and body temperature 98 or so. And if you add a little milk fat to it, it causes a eutectic effect. and then that brings down the melt temperature. Well, that's perfect in your mouth. It melts nicely. It allows those chocolate flavors to move in your mouth, on your tongue, and eventually evaporate into your nasal cavity. And it's just such a nice release of flavors in your mouth, which is why it's such a unique and wonderful experience. And then finally, Sam talked about vanilla. You will rarely find a chocolate that doesn't have vanilla in it. Vanilla is just a wonderful flavor molecule in chocolate. I saw that I did some research, and I'd worked for Hershey for 35 years, but there's evidence that Hershey was using vanillin and not vanilla as far back as 1931. So it's been very common in the chocolate industry in a long time. And this predates having to have an ingredient line on your product. But vanilla not only adds this sweetness note, but it does modify chocolate flavor. It rounds out the bitterness and allows those complex, wonderful flavors to come through. So it's an absolute must tool in a confectioner's box. So anyway, so it's really about the chocolate maker pulling a bunch of different levers to deliver the flavor that the consumer wants, and it's a complex and difficult process. But when you hit that perfect flavor, it's wonderful. So anyway, I appreciate the time you gave me. To me, I talked about, is chocolate good for you? I'd say enjoy chocolate in moderation. It's just a fun food. And then finally, I have to give special thanks to my very good friend, Bruce Kiefer, who's a retired manager of flavor chemistry from Hershey and just an absolute terrific analytical chemist. So Bruce is watching. Thanks, Bruce.
Good afternoon. I have the pleasure of talking to you about a product which is both very dear to me and to our company, Berger Incorporated, which is that 76-year-old, third-generation, still family-owned company located in lovely New Jersey, which you all know as the Garden State. This product is rose oil, which is distilled from the Rose Damascena variety of roses. Rose Damascena was originally cultivated in the Middle East, in Iran and Turkey, well over 1,000 years ago. During the Ottoman occupation of what is now Bulgaria, from 1396 to 1878, this plant material and the knowledge of its cultivation was brought into this area, which is commonly known today as the Rose Valley in the central region of the country. For more than the past 200 years, this area around the cities of Plovdiv and Kazlanak has been the epicenter of rose production. Berger's facilities are in a small town called Starasil, equidistant to those two cities. The name of our company is Berger Trachea, Trachea being the Bulgarian word for Thrace, which you will remember as the Thracian kings, maybe, with their elaborate tombs filled with gold, and also think of Orpheus the musician. Bulgaria has a climate similar to that of the northeastern United States. Macedonia is just to the south, Greece just below that. To the north is the fertile valley of the Danube, and to the east, the Black Sea with its farmland. Russian influence has been and is still strong there. It can be estimated that there are some 3,000 growers delivering roses to the 45 registered distilleries. Again, we estimate, all the numbers I'm giving you today are pretty good estimates, but they are estimates, that 90% of the rose production occurs in the two regions of Plovdiv and Stara Zagora Rose Valley. The volume of flowers harvested is in the vicinity of, 9 million kilos. Every one of those rose petals has been hand-picked from some 5,400 hectares during that brief harvest period of some maybe 4 to 6 weeks, which usually begins in the first week of May. The folks picking these flowers get paid by the weight of what they pick. This year, the going rate was leva 4.5 per kilo. That's a little over $2 a kilo. In gross numbers, that amounts to approximately $22 million, half of which goes to the pickers, and the other half goes to the farmers and the plantation owners. During this past year's harvest, we contracted from over 143 farmers, which picked from about 180 hectares of plantations. As a result, we distilled something close to 350,000 kilos of rose petals, each hand-picked. And bear in mind that it takes 3,500 kilos of petals to produce 1 kilo. That's 1 liter of oil. That yield is largely dependent upon the weather conditions during harvest, but also upon the winter's severity and its precipitation. Over the past several years, we have audited each of these farmers to understand their farming practices with regards to herbicides, pesticides, irrigation, and who exactly is picking their flowers. It is interesting to note that a great number of these pickers are indeed women. By so doing, they bring in something like $800 to $1,000 during the season into their family. The men are usually doing their other farm work. This is important cash income for these folks and their families. The production of rose oil, rose concrete, and rose absolute, the two latter ones are solvent extracted products, is in the neighborhood of about 2,500 kilos annually. Along with what is produced in Turkey and Iran, which we have very little visibility on, and in North Africa, this does suffice for the world's demand. I will note that these two solvent extracted products are primarily used in cosmetic markets and for richer and deeper, perhaps more complex aromas than distilled oil. Interestingly, the cultural associations with flavors and fragrance are profoundly significant. Tastes and preferences vary greatly between countries, which demonstrates strong biases. When we think of roses in the U.S., we think, what of? Valentine's Day, red roses that don't smell very much, do they? Not anymore. Large bouquets, flashy, ostentatious. For Bulgarians and those in the Middle East, rose and rose water feature in not only dozens of fragrances on their shelves, but numerous flavor applications. It is used in cooking, rice pudding, and Turkish delight just come to mind. I was thrown when we saw a recipe dating from 1880s that they used actually real musk grains in their Turkish delight at that time, to which I say, yum. Thinking of cultural preferences, think of oud in Dubai. It's, to us, very heavy, and it's an acquired appreciation. Indian spices can jar a Western sensibility. Lemon in Japan has other associations other than ours of being fresh and clean. Every year during the rose harvest, there is a large festival of roses held in Kozlanak, and smaller ones in other cities such as Starosil. Traditional dress, which you see here, parades, music, and lots of their favorite drink, rakia. A rose queen is elected, which is a great, great honor to that young woman and to her family. This year, Berger held its spring board meeting at Berger Trakia so that these folks could get the flavor of what I've been blabbing about to them for over the past years. On one of those mornings, 14 of us took to the fields in our raincoats and boots to pick. In about 3 hours, we picked a total of 55 kilos. Paltry at best when an experienced Bulgarian picker does maybe 60 or 70 kilos in a 5 or 6 hour day. Those 55 kilos might yield a total of 14 grams of oil. That's half an ounce, which one could translate into about, if you were making finished perfume, about 70 bottles of a Chanel No. 5. Needless to say, the boss did not pay us much for our work that day. We got lunch, though. You'll see in this photograph here, these photos here, up top left is a rose plantation. There's the band of us 14 in the bottom right, after we'd finished our harvest. A delivery of roses in the top right, which was about to be distilled in one morning. What I want to mention to you that each of those bags contains about 22 to 25 kilos. Now, if I mentioned that if 3,500 kilos are needed to produce 1 kilo of rose oil, it takes 140 of those plastic bags to distill 1 kilo of oil. Not a lot. And then also you see our factory in the bottom left. And in the middle, you'll see our some people, I think it's Doiko and Valeria taking out the rose oil after a few days' work. I want to show you what a typical GC of rose oil looks like so that you can marvel at its wondrous complexity, which accounts for its sophisticated, enigmatic aroma. We analyze regularly 45 of the readily identifiable 100 components. Some of these should be familiar to you, things like geraniol, citronellol, geranyl acetate, rose oxide, which features prominently in red wine, by the way, and which contributes, we have found, dramatically to a lychee flavor, and then to phenylethyl alcohol. In this slide, you can see where we have earmarked that, where it's a major factor in the attributes of rose and rose flavors and fragrances. It is produced synthetically now in great abundance, and it accounts for most of the rose fragrances that you would be familiar with. Here we some products in the market which we feel do contain real rose oil, though, as well as the names you would know, things like Chanel No. 5, L'air du Temps, Tom Ford, Delina. But on account of its price, and rose oil is something between $10,000 and $14,000 a kilo, usage is relegated to these fine fragrances, except in flavors, where it does found a lot more usage as well, in things like rose lemonade, Turkish delight, which I've mentioned, ginger ale, and expensive chocolates. It is known for the quality of blooming, which one experiences in your mouth when eating it. If any of you have grown roses, you're aware of how finicky and difficult they can be. They need a lot of care, pruning, fertilizers, and irrigation. If the Bulgarian farmer does not take care of this field of flowers, the yields per hectare will be reduced. Equally as challenging is the weather, which dictates the number of flowers a field will produce, the yields of the finished product, and the length of harvesting. They do love a late afternoon rain, a cool night, and warm sunny mornings. For the record, 2025 failed on each of those accounts. It was a horrible year. We try to be good stewards of these plantations and of the folks who are growing and picking them. Here in this picture is Maria Caneva, who has been our manager for 25 years there, and Rich Hoffman, our head of QC in Carteret. I have mentioned that most of our product comes mostly from family farms. Rose would be a second or third crop for most of them, but it is an important one that brings a lot of income to their families. There is no mechanization whatsoever. This hand-picking also accounts for the many floral products which we use in flavors and fragrances. Neroli and jasmine come immediately to mind. And for just an interesting number for you to contemplate, in India, which produces most of the peppermint oil that we use in flavors today, some 1 million farmers are busy picking and harvesting peppermint there. Our essential oil crops are a great cultural and agricultural significance in many parts of the world, and they are not the most sustainable product we can use. Thank you very much.
Thanks for all of your presentations, Sam, Jim, and Kim. I'm going to pose one general question and ask you guys to, all three of you, answer within 5 minutes. I know it's short, but for the greatest social good for our audience. How does a young chemist get started in the flavor industry, sort of from the ground up? Samuel, let's take a first stab.
Yeah. That's a really great question. When I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, my career, somebody gave me the advice to do just that: start at the ground and work your way up. I started working in production sample lab at a flavor company in Owings Mills, Maryland. And it turned out to be the best advice, but always be curious, always ask questions, always let people know that you're engaged. And hopefully the rest path will go to you. It's really is about being open, being patient. For me, it was a 7-year process to become certified. I was seeing friends who I thought were on a fast trajectory for success. And there I was plodding along in a flavor company. But patience, patience, patience.
For myself as a chemical engineer, and it had on the title slide, I'm PhD, and I have a bachelor's in chemical engineering. When I started working in the food industry, it was all about processing and how to make a process efficient and how to drive, to the final product. But that can't be separated from the sensory experience. So as much as you see this data on paper in terms of what you're delivering, it has to be, how do people enjoy the product? So it really is, as someone new into the industry is starting to work, it's immediately going to I want to satisfy people. I want people to be excited. And so you steer yourself toward learning more about that. And as Sam said, you should always be curious. And you need a mentor. You have to go out and find one or two people that, make a difference and go to them for help. And it's amazing. Normally, the more seasoned people are always happy to devote their time to you.
I agree with everybody that said it. The curious one is really important. And I say to ask questions and then listen. And don't talk too much. And I think that everybody company that we know of is always looking for young people and talents. We're interested in learning stuff. Because one of the things I found in this business, like no 2 days are the same, especially when we're like companies like us, we're dealing around the world with climate change in every part of the world, and products come from South Africa to Indonesia to China and India and Australia, and it's just a fascinating thing. And no 2 days are the same, and for young people who are interested in learning stuff and seeing the world, I think it's just ask.
Fantastic. So I'm going to ask an interesting question that I think all three of you can address. And that is, how, in your experience, does emotional state or mood affect flavor in your experience?
I can
Some days
start.
that bourbon just doesn't taste so good, does it?
Let's no, it does. Yeah, if anything, I think flavor elevates the mood. Think about chocolate. Taking a bite of chocolate can elevate your mood. It's really about considering your mood and how you can change it with. I think that's the great way to approach it. What do I feel like that's going to bring me up? And it could be also getting people around food. Make something for friends, something that you enjoy. There's a great book called The Taste of Molecules, and it talks about this. She opens up by talking about bringing a dish that her mother used to make to this party. Her mother has passed away. And it just elevated her to share that dish with her friends and bring it to this party. But it also brought her mother to that party as well. And, I think that that's what we need to do, is find those food items that can elevate our mood. I'm not going to eat chocolate when I'm depressed. Well, maybe I will, but it will definitely make me feel better.
It will bring you out of your depression. Right. That's
exactly.
I want to add to that. It's this, I think music and aromas are unusual in that they immediately conjure up memories. So when you walk into someone's house where cookies are being baked, it'll bring you back to some childhood memory that was important to you. And I think it's very powerful. And usually it brings you back to happy times. So I think aromas can always, especially there are certain ones that trigger in everyone some happy experiences.
Right.
And Jim, it's very interesting you should mention that, because the same vocabulary is used to describe music as it is to describe flavors and fragrances. It's the same vocabulary.
They're notes.
Notes, chords, and harmonies.
Yeah,
same one.
Yep.
And I think they're very similar in that way. I think you're absolutely correct.
That's why I loved seeing that chocolate bar with that music composition in it. flavored with rose. I thought that was incredible.
Yeah.
And it really made you feel like something special because it was an original score that they provide for you.
Mhm. So here's another question that I think all of you might be able to address. I mean, well, I've looked very, very summarily into flavor chemistry and receptors and the neurobiology involved. I mean, can you guys each give a quick comment on your favorite example of where one chemical that's involved in flavor of rose, chocolate, or wine has been either sort of blunted or accentuated by other chemicals? I mean, the interactions between all these compounds is so profound, and many chemicals acting on one or two receptors. Sam, you want to get started?
Yeah, so what comes to mind is vanillin. I will use vanillin in flavor just to bridge everything together. It can also have a negative effect as far as sitting on top of a flavor is what we call it. So I just recently was creating some strawberries, and it was for a high protein yogurt. And I used some vanillin, and it just wasn't, the flavor wasn't opening up. So I actually had to remove that vanillin to open up that flavor. When I talk about opening up, when you take that first bite of the high protein yogurt, you want that burst of flavor. You want to say, oh, this is delicious. I'm going to go for a second spoon of yogurt. So, vanillin is sort of a little bit of a miracle molecule. It's also used in taste modification for bitterness throughout. Pea protein is huge in the industry. How do we modify that? Add a touch of vanillin, and it really can make a big difference.
I would second that with Sam. I mean, vanillin is so important in the confectionery industry to help out, and it helps out in other things as well. And especially that sweetness it brings and changes bitterness. The other one since you talked about vanillin, the other one in the chocolate industry is sugar. If anybody's ever tasted 100% cacao or a 99% cacao chocolate bar, it's pretty much intolerable because it's too bitter. And bringing that from 100% down to an 80% or a 75 makes an incredible difference. And sugar improves the chocolate flavor. It not only blocks the bitterness, but it helps accentuate the chocolate flavor. So both vanillin and sugar for the chocolate maker, they're critical.
Jim, do you have anything to say?
Yeah. I would actually approach it conversely. That I believe that the complexity of a lot of these things adds to their dynamics and our appreciation of them. I like vanillin too, but I think there's something much more enjoyable about the vanilla flavor, a real vanilla flavor, or a rose, or my favorite would be with a product called vetiver oil, which name you probably know, which comes from Haiti primarily, which has probably about 300 components in it. And it's one of the most complex and most beautiful fragrances you can ever imagine. So just conversely, rather than being negative on canceling out, I think the complexity adds.
Yeah, the use of essential oils adds a lot of complexity to flavor creation, which I love used as well.
Yeah, and as far as we know, vanillin itself binds to at least 3 different classes of receptors. So it's amazing. So here's another question that is kind of an amalgamation of several. Can each of you comment on the trend towards use of natural ingredients in food products versus artificial or single chemical components in the food industry?
Well, it's a trend that's been ongoing. I think the thing to know and realize is that the molecules that we use that are either by biosynthesis or through more aggressive catalyst biochemical means are exactly the same. So artificial has notoriously been used in the candy industry because artificial flavors are less expensive. If I'm going to create a high-end strawberry flavor, I might use some rose oil as a background note, very, very low. When you think about creating flavors that are developed from something that blooms. Think about the flower of the strawberry. So you add a hint of that bloom to that background note of that profile. So it's somewhat market driven as far as natural. Flavor companies are very conscientious of sustainability with their raw materials and what they work with as well. So sustainability is very important, and being kind to the environment is also very important.
Sam, I think there's one other thing there as well, and that has to do, you look at vanillin as an example, where many chocolate companies use vanillin, and a lot turn to natural vanillin, which could come from vanilla, but as you showed in the picture, it comes from clove as well. And then you could put natural flavors on your ingredient line, but they are the same chemical and they work the same way. Well, why didn't companies go to just a vanilla extract? Well, you're using vanillin in such a small amount, you need consistency in order to drive the same flavor in your product from day to day. So the food companies will lean on artificial flavors a lot of times because they're consistent and they deliver well. And then coming up with natural versions of them, the market is driving that way. Okay, but we want something that is consistent. So it's a tough road.
What the idea about, artificial flavors have a bad rap a lot of the time, because most of the chemicals that we use in those artificial flavors are replications of what exists in nature. When we talk about a strawberry flavor, what you do is we deconstruct what that in strawberry, and we synthesize those chemicals that are in strawberry and put them back together. Primarily, that's it. And of course, we're using other chemicals now that don't necessarily exist in nature, but a lot of them that we didn't think exist actually do, and we're finding them in some flower in the rainforest in Brazil. But I like the natural stuff, and I say use more essential oils all the time, guys, please.
I was going to say one of the things. So in chocolate, would you use an artificial chocolate flavor? Chocolate flavor is so complex; it's very difficult to come up with an artificial flavor. So people are pretty much using unsweetened chocolate to deliver a chocolate flavor.
Yeah, and if the speaker's slides didn't emphasize it enough, the flavor components of each of these materials is hundreds to thousands of compounds. It's absolutely profound and complex. Quick question for all three of you as well. Please comment on the health benefits that have been identified. What's the current thinking around the health benefits of wine, health benefits of chocolates, or essential floral oils?
Consume as much as you can.
It sounds cliche. Well, just moderation. I mean, certainly you're going to get fat if you eat a lot of chocolate. You're going to become an alcoholic if you drink too much wine. But moderation.
You are?
Absolutely.
Life
Jim,
has
please
risks,
continue.
Sam.
Okay. Jim.
Well, I was going to say, there have been some studies that have shown that non-fat cacao can help lower blood pressure a little bit, but it's one of these, again, it's about moderation. I think it's more a food to be enjoyed because it makes you feel good, and you have a few calories every few days, but it's not to be eaten as a health food.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got a quick question for Jim from the audience. The harvesting, the drying of cacao. First of all, I noticed that the fermentation is with the hulls on it. I was kind of surprised and interested to see that. Can you comment a little bit about how modification of the process of harvesting and processing cocoa beans changes its flavor?
Well, again, when I talked about origins, there are some countries that are well known for fermenting properly, and some countries that kind of try to do it very quickly and don't deliver a good flavor. And there's also been some companies, and Hershey did research back in the 1970s and 80s into that fermentation pile to deliver specific microorganisms to dry flavors. When you think about wine, you think about beer, it's all about, what strain are you adding to that wine and beer to make sure everything goes well, except for those monks in Belgium. With chocolate, we have found the natural yeast that's in the environment does a great job. And to try and bring it down to 2 or 3 just has not worked. It has ended up with a product that is not quite right. You can find out in the market, there's a B2B chocolate company, Barry Callebaut, that has a brand, Coco Terroir, that they try and drive a flavor specifically by inoculating the fermentation pile. But so far, it hasn't worked on a commercial scale. I mean, that the natural processes that the farmers use has been the best.
Yeah, I've been surprised. Not only do you have fungi in there, but a few different bacteria, which is, I was amazed at the mixture of critters that are in there to do the fermentation. So at this point, I'd like to ask each panelist, starting with Sam, for your final thoughts that you'd like to impart to the audience.
I would say, be curious. One wonderful thing about my career is it also gives me a chance to be creative, be open-minded. I think Kim brought a great point as far as think about expanding your world through your language, through the language of food, also through the language of culture. It's so important that we keep open minds and really explore the food world. And really food is our common language that we can share together.
I think back to a time when I was a senior in college and I was a TA for the chairman of the department. And he asked me where I was going to work. And I told him that I was going to General Foods. And he looked at me and he was so depressed that it was such this, like, how could a good chemical engineer go work in the food industry? And after 40 some years, it was just wonderful. And I won't put down the oil and chemical industry, but it was just this discovery. And food, agricultural products, they vary a great deal. When you bring in a drum of something, it's going to be different day to day, as opposed to if you're a chemist or a chemical engineer in the oil industry or chemical industry. So it creates a lot of challenges. And then also, consumers are fickle. You're constantly changing or chasing what the consumers wanted. And it just makes for a delightful career because there's constant change and constant new challenges. And as Sam says, the way to hit that is being curious and try and learn as much as you can. So I had a great time in chocolate. It was a wonderful, wonderful life.
Jim, how much chocolate did you ever eat during the course of your job at Hershey? Did you eat a lot?
Kim, I did. I ate every day. Every day. I went to taste panel every day. And I ran the chocolate product development department. Well, when people were working on things, I had to eat it. That's the only way to evaluate things. So, and at one time, the Hershey recipe kitchens, so the people baking things with Hershey products, they reported to me, I was in that kitchen every day.
How many brownies did you?
Oh, countless. Cookies, brownies, cakes, countless. It was wonderful.
Just that, I'll just talk about the complexity again of natural products, in that how human beings have been using the agricultural and spices and herbs for probably like 80 or 1,000 years. Things like rosemary, we've been using as an antioxidant in food. Agricultural stuff, archaeological stuff said it goes back maybe 100,000 years we've been using this stuff. And our bodies is accustomed and have grown to appreciate them or live with them. And the stuff that wasn't good for us, we don't eat. We don't eat poison ivy, and so these natural things are I think are the ones that our bodies have accustomed to. And even like beer and wine, which we've been drinking a long time, as we talk about moderation, they're okay for us.
Yep. There you go. So, in closing, for my part, I really appreciate the 3 panelists. I realize the audience didn't get all their questions answered, but what we're trying to do in this thing is to stimulate your curiosity. Go and do a little bit of research on food and flavor industry and come back. You can even contact these guys. They'll answer probably some questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Grace.
Thank you. That was fascinating. If you liked what you learned today, we have more on our website at the Science History Institute, and links are in the chat. And I will mention just 2 digital magazine articles from our distillations team, a story about the chemistry of wine flavors, and The Right Stuff, which is about the flavor and scent of strawberries. Just like our talk today, the very best part about the Science History Institute is that access to our articles, collections, podcasts, and events is free. We invite you to support our work with your gift if you wish. All Joseph Priestley Society programming is recorded, and you can access the full selection of talks online at sciencehistory.org/JPS videos. Our next JPS lecture is on green cities, greening the urban landscape, and that will take place on April 22nd and can be found on our website along with other programs of interest.
Thank you for watching this presentation. ACS Webinars is provided as a service by the American Chemical Society as your professional source for live weekly discussions and presentations that connect you with subject matter experts and global thought leaders concerning today's relevant professional issues in the chemical sciences, management, and business.